On a quiet November morning in 1992, a motorcyclist rode through the dusty outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, when something caught his eye near the roadside brush. At first, it looked like discarded clothing, but as he stopped and moved closer, horror replaced curiosity. It was the body of a woman. Police arrived quickly and sealed the area. The woman was found face down, her wrists bound, her clothes torn, and her body showing signs of assault. It was a brutal crime in a place known for silence, open desert, pale sand, and the dry hum of wind through cactus. Investigators soon identified her as Denise Johnson, a 32-year-old single mother who had been reported missing the night before. She had failed to pick up her young daughter from a friend's house, something her friends said she would never do. Denise was steady, responsible, and deeply devoted to her child. Her sudden disappearance sent alarm through the community. At the scene, detectives found tire marks leading away from the body and faint footprints in the sand. There were no witnesses and little sign of struggle beyond the disturbed ground. Near the victim's hair, officers noticed a few small seed pods, dry and brittle. They collected them, though no one yet knew their significance. Back at headquarters, veteran investigator Detective Bill Birch took charge. He began reconstructing Denise's last known hours. Friends told police she had planned to meet a coworker that evening, Mark Bogan, a 35-year-old truck driver who sometimes helped with deliveries at her workplace. When questioned, Bogan admitted seeing Denise that night but claimed he dropped her home safely. His answers were vague, his timeline inconsistent. Then came a discovery that changed everything. A pager belonging to Bogan was found near the body. Confronted, he said it must have been lost days earlier, though he couldn't explain why he'd been anywhere near the desert. Detectives impounded his company pickup truck for forensic testing. Inside, crime scene technicians found faint bloodstains on the floor mat and, caught in the rubber grooves, a few small seed pods identical to those found beside Denise's body. To most, it seemed like a coincidence. Palo verde trees, the source of those pods, were common across Arizona. But one forensic expert would soon prove that these tiny fragments weren't just ordinary plants. They were silent witnesses, carrying a genetic code that could link a killer directly to his crime. The desert had given up a clue, one small, unassuming detail that would grow into one of the most groundbreaking cases in forensic science. At the Phoenix Crime Lab, the evidence from Denise Johnson's murder was carefully laid out on sterile metal tables, swabs, soil samples, tire casts, and a small paper envelope labeled "Seed Pods, Scene and Suspect Vehicle." Detective Bill Birch had a suspect in mind, Mark Bogan, the last person to see Denise alive. The pager found beside her body tied him to the desert, but without stronger proof, it wasn't enough to charge him. The tiny seeds, though, intrigued the forensic team. They were identified as Palo Verde seed pods, tan, brittle, and distinctively shaped. Since Palo Verde trees grew almost everywhere in Arizona, their presence alone meant little. But then, Dr. Tim Helenjaris, a molecular geneticist from the University of Arizona, proposed something no one had tried before in a criminal investigation: DNA testing on a plant. The idea seemed radical at the time. In 1992, DNA profiling was still a young science, used mainly for human identification. But Helenjaris believed the same principle could apply to plants. Each tree, like every person, had its own genetic fingerprint. If the pods from the truck matched those from the tree near Denise's body, it would prove that the vehicle had been at the crime scene. Investigators returned to the desert and found a Palo Verde tree only a few feet from where the body had been discovered. They collected fresh seed pods and bark samples under strict forensic protocols. Every sample was sealed, logged, and transported for analysis. At the lab, Dr. Helenjaris extracted DNA from the pods and compared them using a process called RFLP, restriction fragment length polymorphism testing. The results were striking. The genetic pattern of the pods found in Bogan's truck matched perfectly with those from the specific tree beside the crime scene, a match so unique it ruled out any other source. Forensic science had just made history. For the first time, a plant's DNA had been used to link a suspect to a murder. With the seed evidence strengthening their case, detectives revisited the other findings. The bloodstains in Bogan's truck matched Denise's blood type, and fibers consistent with her clothing were found on the passenger seat. Together, these details painted a chilling picture. Denise had likely been assaulted inside the vehicle, then dumped in the desert under the cover of darkness. Bogan continued to deny involvement, insisting the evidence was coincidence. but the science was unyielding. The Palo Verde tree, silent and rooted in the desert, had spoken the truth. For Detective Birch, it was the breakthrough he'd been waiting for, proof not written in words, but encoded in nature itself. With the Palo Verde DNA results in hand, investigators felt a quiet surge of confidence. After weeks of chasing fragments of evidence, the case against Mark Bogan was finally taking shape. But before they could make an arrest, detectives wanted to build a narrative strong enough to stand up in court, one that no defense attorney could easily unravel. Detective Bill Birch began retracing Bogan's movements on the night Denise Johnson disappeared. Witnesses placed him leaving work shortly after Denise's shift ended. A coworker recalled seeing them talking in the parking lot. Another remembered Bogan's truck parked unusually close to Denise's car. By 9 p.m., both vehicles were gone. Investigators suspected Denise had agreed to meet Bogan somewhere after work. Their relationship had been friendly, but co-workers hinted that Bogan's interest in her went further than that. He was always hanging around, one said. Sometimes she seemed uncomfortable. When detectives pressed him again, Bogan stuck to his story. He and Denise had gone for a short drive, talked for a while, and then he dropped her off safely at home. But her neighbors never saw her return that night, and phone records showed no calls made from her residence after she left. Then came the forensic results that closed the distance between suspicion and certainty. The blood on the truck's floor mat was confirmed to be Denise's. The fibers found on her clothing matched the truck's interior fabric. And now, the seed pods, identical in genetic makeup to the tree standing just feet from her body, tied Bogan's truck directly to the crime scene. Bogan's calm exterior began to crack. When detectives questioned him about the seeds, he laughed nervously, claiming he must have picked them up while driving through the desert. But the lab results left no room for coincidence. Those pods came from one specific tree, not just any Palo Verde. On December 17, 1992, police obtained an arrest warrant. Officers surrounded Bogan's home and took him into custody without resistance. Inside, they found personal items belonging to Denise, a ring she always wore and a hair clip her daughter later identified as her mother's favorite. At trial, the prosecution built its case around the unshakable precision of science. The Palo Verde DNA became the centerpiece, a silent witness from the desert that could not be bribed, coerced, or mistaken. While Bogan's defense claimed contamination and coincidence, the jury saw something different, a man caught by the smallest detail imaginable, the genetic signature of a tree. For the first time in forensic history, botanical DNA was used to convict a murderer. And as the verdict approached, the courtroom fell into the same kind of stillness that had once covered the desert where it all began. Seeds by her hair, the ones caught in the truck's mat, and the decision to treat them as evidence instead of debris. When closing arguments began, the prosecution didn't dramatize the story. They didn't need to. They simply let the evidence speak, a chain of logic rooted in biology, patience, and truth. The desert, silent and impartial, had recorded everything. Now, through science, it was telling the story again, leaf by leaf, cell by cell, until there was no doubt left of what had happened that night. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, the courtroom was silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. Mark Bogan sat expressionless at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. A wave of quiet relief moved through the courtroom. After more than a year of uncertainty, Denise Johnson's family finally had an answer, one carried not by eyewitnesses or confessions, but by nature itself. When the sentence was read, life imprisonment without parole, Bogan stared straight ahead. He offered no apology, no explanation. For the investigators who had spent countless nights piecing together the puzzle, it was the moment when science, persistence, and intuition finally converged. In the years that followed, the case of planted evidence became a landmark in forensic history. The success of the Palo Verde DNA test opened a new frontier, proving that plants, pollen, and even soil could serve as silent witnesses to crime. It gave birth to a new field, forensic botany. Dr. Tim Helland-Jarries continued his research, working with law enforcement across the country. His pioneering work demonstrated that the natural world could hold information as specific and reliable as any fingerprint or human DNA strand. What had begun as a bold experiment in an Arizona lab became a model for future investigations. Detective Bill Birch, looking back years later, called it the most remarkable case of his career. "We thought we were chasing a man," he said, but in the end, it was a tree that caught him. For Denise Johnson's daughter, the verdict offered only partial comfort. She grew up knowing her mother's killer had been brought to justice, but also knowing the cost of that truth. In interviews years later, she described visiting the site where her mother had been found, standing beneath that same palo verde tree, now older, its branches stretching across the sand. "It's strange," she said quietly. "That tree was the last thing my mom ever saw, and the thing that made sure he couldn't hide what he did. The desert remains unchanged, still vast, still silent. But to those who remember the case, it's no longer empty land. It's a living archive, a reminder that even the smallest part of nature can preserve a human story." And somewhere beyond Phoenix, that same palo verde tree still stands, its roots deep in the sand, its branches whispering in the wind, the unspoken witness to a crime that science refused to let fade away.